She thought about him more when he wasn't trying than she thought about anyone who ever tried everything. That is the paradox most men spend their entire lives failing to understand. The one who gives the most receives the least attention. The one who adjusts, accommodates, performs, and proves, he is the one she forgets most easily. And the one who does none of those things, who remains entirely, stubbornly, and quietly himself, he is the one she cannot stop returning to in her mind, even when she would prefer to. You have been on the wrong side of this. You gave. You tried. You were present, attentive, available, and you felt, over time, the precise diminishing return of being someone who required nothing of her to maintain himself because he had already organized himself entirely around her. You became easy, expected, ambient, and what was ambient was eventually overlooked. What you didn't have, what the man she could not stop thinking about always had, was the quality that no amount of effort produces and no amount of devotion replaces. The quality of being genuinely, unalterably his own. Picture a room. She has been talking to him for 40 minutes. He has been engaged, warm, present, interesting. But there is something about the engagement that is different from every other man's engagement. He does not check to see if she is enjoying him. His posture does not adjust when she goes quiet. He is not performing for her. He is simply there entirely, and the entirety of his there-ness does not require her response to remain intact. She goes home and thinks about him for 3 days. She did not fall for what he did. She fell for what he refused to do, and that refusal had a name most men never learn. What follows is the precise psychological architecture of that man, the mechanism behind his pull, and what it actually asks of anyone who wants to build it genuinely. You already know the shape of what went wrong. Not the specific events, the specific feeling that ran beneath all of them. You tried. With more deliberateness than the relationship ever asked for. You shaped your behavior around her responses, refined your approach based on her reactions, became increasingly careful with how you came across, not out of calculation but out of genuine investment. You wanted her to see you fully and choose what she saw. So you made sure what she saw was, at every moment, as close as possible to what you believed she needed. And at some point, the trying became visible. The care became readable as anxiety. The attention became readable as dependence. The investment she was supposed to feel as depth started registering as something else entirely, the particular quality of a man whose sense of self was organized around the outcome of her reaction. You did not realize the precise moment it shifted. You only felt the consequence, the slight flattening of her engagement, the decrease in the particular aliveness that used to be present when you were in the same room, the growing suspicion that something you couldn't locate had changed. A man prepares for a conversation with the woman he's been with for 8 months. He actually prepares. He reviews what he wants to say, anticipates her responses, thinks about the phrasing that will land best. He does this not because the conversation is high stakes, but because her reception of him has become the primary metric by which he assesses whether a given interaction went well. Her warmth is his report card. He has been grading himself on this rubric for months without noticing. She hasn't said anything about it. She didn't need to. She felt the submission in it long before he was aware of it himself. The brutal contrast. The man she found most compelling never graded himself on her reception. He said what he thought and then moved on with his own thoughts. He did not stay in the conversation after it ended, reviewing his performance. He was already somewhere else. And where he was is the entire question this video was built to answer. The mechanism behind the man she cannot control, and cannot stop thinking about, is not mystery. It is not calculated unavailability. It is not the performance of disinterest designed to create longing. It is psychological sovereignty. The deep, structural, entirely non-performative reality of a man who owns his own interior, whose identity, whose standards, whose sense of worth are governed from the inside rather than negotiated through her ongoing response to him. That quality, sovereignty over the self, produces a specific and consistent effect in the dynamic between them. She cannot find the lever that moves him. She tests, as women test, through withdrawal, through emotional pressure, through the specific friction of a woman who is checking whether his ground holds or shifts. And when she applies these tests to the sovereign man, something unfamiliar happens. He does not move. Not with aggression. Not with coldness. He simply remains where he was, present, warm when warmth is appropriate, entirely himself, and her pressure finds no purchase. The lever she reaches for is not there. The mechanism that was supposed to make him recalibrate toward her is absent. And the absence is both infuriating and magnetic in a way she cannot cleanly separate. Contrast this with the man who moves. Every application of her pressure produces a visible response in him. A slight softening, a recalibration, a behavioral shift that communicates the same thing every time. You have reach inside me, and that reach is available to you whenever you choose to use it. She appreciates the responsiveness in some moments. In all moments, she loses a degree of respect that she will not recover. The sovereign man transmits something entirely different. His lack of movement says, there is something here that is not available to be organized around your preference. And what cannot be organized around a woman's preference is what she spends disproportionate energy thinking about. Picture her trying to read him after a conversation in which he disagreed with something she said. Not aggressively, simply directly. She expected the familiar sequence. She would express displeasure, he would soften, the friction would resolve. Instead, he received her displeasure with the equanimity of someone who had already located his own position and found it stable. She stayed in the conversation differently after that. He didn't try to be uncontrollable. He was simply too whole to be controlled. And wholeness has never needed to announce itself, it is simply recognized. What this produces in the lived texture of attraction, behavior, and desire is the section that makes this viscerally real. It does not arrive as a grand statement. It arrives in the specific texture of how a man occupies space, in the small moments that accumulate into the total impression of someone who cannot be fully managed. She mentions an ex casually in conversation, the kind of mention that is slightly deliberate, carrying the faint charge of a woman assessing what the mention produces in him. The accommodating man's response is readable. A slight shift in posture, a micro-expression of something between attention and threat assessment, the behavioral reorganization of someone who has just been reminded that he is not the only variable in her history. The sovereign man receives the mention with the equanimity of someone who was not threatened by the existence of her past before she mentioned it and is not threatened after. He acknowledges it, moves on, returns to the conversation's original current. She notices the non-reaction. Something in her calibrates. It shows up in how he handles her disengagement. She goes quiet, the particular weighted quiet of a woman who is generating space to see what he does with it. The accommodating man fills it immediately. Questions, warmth, the behavioral evidence of someone for whom her silence constitutes a problem requiring resolution. The sovereign man lets the silence exist. He is not unaware of it. He is not performing indifference. He simply does not treat her silence as an emergency that his behavior must resolve. She breaks the silence first. It shows up most clearly in how he speaks about his own life, his work, his direction, his values. He does not present these things for her approval. He does not edit them for her comfort. He simply describes them with the confidence of a man who was engaged with them before she arrived and will continue to be engaged with them regardless of her opinion of them. There is no seeking in the description. She becomes curious about a man's life when his life does not appear to require her curiosity to justify it. The reframe that changes everything. She is not obsessing over his mystery. She is obsessing over his realness. The specific, uncommon realness of a man who is genuinely there. Not performing, not managing, not presenting, just occupying his own life with the full weight of someone who actually lives it. And real, in a landscape of performance, is the rarest thing she has encountered. What it means at the deepest level, why the sovereign man produces obsession rather than just attraction, is the section that changes how this is understood entirely. Here is the truth that most men are never handed clearly enough to act on, and it lives at the intersection of desire, psychology, and the most honest observation of how human beings actually operate in intimate dynamics. A woman's obsession with a man she cannot control is not irrational. It is the precise, predictable response of a human mind to a specific stimulus, the encounter with something that remains genuinely beyond its influence. The mind does not obsess over what it fully possesses. It does not fixate on what is entirely resolved. Human psychology, across culture, across history, across every psychological framework that has ever attempted to map it, obsesses over the unresolved, the unfinished, the not quite captured. The man she cannot control is, by structural definition, always slightly unresolved for her. Not because he withholds himself, because he is genuinely complete in a way that does not require her completion of him. And a complete person can be known, can be loved, can be deeply engaged with, but cannot be owned, cannot be entirely captured, cannot be fully resolved into the simple comfort of total possession. That impossibility is what the obsession lives inside. Here is the line that will fracture the comments and deserves honest examination. A woman does not obsess over a man because he is the best she has met. She obsesses over him because he is the first she could not make less of himself for her. Every man who adjusted, softened, recalibrated, and reorganized in response to her emotional pressure was, in doing so, becoming less, becoming smaller in proportion to her reach inside him. And she felt the diminishment, not as satisfaction, but as the quiet confirmation that the version of him she was engaging with was negotiable, manageable, not quite real. The sovereign man refuses the diminishment. Not through resistance, not through conflict, through the simple, structural reality of an identity that is not available for reduction. He is what he is, and what he is does not contract when she tests its edges. Picture a woman lying awake at 2 a.m., not thinking about the man who answered every text within minutes, not replaying the words of the man who told her exactly what she wanted to hear. She is thinking about the man who said something she didn't expect, who looked at her with genuine interest but without urgency, who occupied the room as if the room's opinion of him was a matter of minor relevance. He was not trying to be unforgettable. He simply refused to become forgettable, and those two things could not be more different. The architecture of that man is not a mystery to construct. It is a discipline to build. And building it changes not just how she experiences him, it changes who he actually is. The shift toward becoming the man she cannot control is not a behavioral adjustment. Any man who approaches this as a set of techniques, responding slower, speaking less, engineering unavailability, is still organizing himself around her response, still using her as the reference point, still inside the dependency that produced the problem. The genuine shift is interior, and it requires something most men are not prepared for: the decision to make his own life, his own standards, his own direction, his own becoming the primary occupation of his attention. Not in opposition to her, not as a strategy against her, as the honest, structural reality of a man who was already a person before she arrived. A man with a genuine direction does not manufacture resistance to her influence. He has no surplus attention to spend on absorbing her pressure and recalibrating around it, because his attention is already genuinely occupied. His life has requirements. His standards have weight. His values have been tested enough times that he knows what they actually are. Not the values he performs when he wants to be seen in a particular light, but the ones that determine his actual behavior when no one is watching. That man is not trying to be uncontrollable. He is simply too full to be emptied by her. Contrast the man who became progressively smaller in each relationship, who gave more, accommodated more, became more available, with the man who remained consistently himself across all of them. The first man is bewildered by the pattern of diminishing returns. The second man is occasionally inconvenient, occasionally challenging, and always, in the deepest sense, real. She may not always enjoy the reality. She never forgets it. If this is landing in a place that is specific rather than general, if you can feel the gap between the man you have been operating as and the man being described, stay with that gap. Do not rush past it, because what follows is the final piece that determines whether the understanding becomes something you can actually live. The warning is aimed specifically at the man who has heard this video's thesis and is now constructing a performance around it. He is going to respond less. He is going to make himself less available. He is going to hold positions not because he actually believes them, but because he has learned that position holding produces a specific response in her. He is going to perform sovereignty without building it. This fails. It always fails. Not immediately. The performance can sustain for weeks, sometimes months, before the emptiness beneath it becomes legible. But it becomes legible Because genuine sovereignty is stable under pressure, and the performed version is not. The moment she applies real emotional friction, the kind that is not designed to test but simply arrived, the performance reveals the need it was constructed to conceal. And once that need is visible, everything the performance built collapses faster than if it had never been built. A man who performs not needing her still needs her. She feels the difference between a man who is genuinely complete and a man who is acting complete to avoid being seen as incomplete. Picture a man who has applied the tactics for 6 weeks. She's more engaged. He feels the change and the feeling activates the need. He reaches back before she fully reached first. The performance breaks. She loses the engagement she was developing. He does not understand why, because from the outside his behavior had not visibly changed. The lesson is this: the only version of this that works is the real version. A man who builds an actual interior, actual standards, actual direction, actual self-possession, does not need to perform sovereignty. He is it. And the woman who encounters that man does not obsess over his technique. She obsesses over him. Because there is no technique. There is only a person, fully present, who does not require her to be complete. That person is built before the relationship, not inside it. And the final section is about what that building actually produces. This is the full architecture, assembled. The man women obsess over is not the best-looking man they have met, or the wealthiest, or the most verbally skilled, or the one who knew exactly what to say at exactly the right moment. He is the man whose identity remained intact across every interaction she had with it. Who did not become a candidate when she entered the room. Who did not reorganize himself into something more palatable when she applied pressure to the original. Who was, across every test she ran and every moment she watched, recognizably, consistently, uncompromisingly himself. That consistency, not the performance of it, but the actual structural reality of a man who has built an interior stable enough to hold itself under any condition, is the rarest thing she encounters. Because the culture that shaped the men around her taught them that flexibility is virtue, that accommodation is love, that the willingness to reshape oneself in response to a woman's preferences is the mark of a serious man. What it is actually the mark of is a man without a floor. And a man without a floor cannot be stood on, cannot be leaned into, cannot produce the particular, unchosen, almost helpless quality of a woman's genuine obsession. She cannot obsess over a man she can fully shape. You can only be consumed by something you cannot contain. If this channel has been giving you a quality of clarity that most places withhold, the kind that hands you the actual mechanism rather than the comfortable version of it, subscribe. This is what the channel exists to produce, and there is more of this coming. If you know a man who is working harder and harder inside relationships that keep producing less and less, who is adjusting, softening, giving more and watching the return diminish, share this with him. Not as advice, as the mirror he hasn't had access to. Leave a comment with this: what is the one part of yourself you gave up in a relationship, in the hope that the giving would make her stay, and did the giving work? Because that answer, held honestly, is the beginning of understanding everything this video has been building toward. The man she could never forget was not the one who gave her everything. He was the one who gave nothing of himself away.